In this video, I'm going to give you 5 tips how to make your turbocharged car faster and more powerful. So let's get right to it. Hey, I'm Al from Dino Flash Videos, and I'm coming to you from my man cave where I have all my trophies from 30 years of tuning and wrenching high performance cars. I've won a lot of races and I've traveled all around the world tuning cars. Well, today we're going to break it down and give you some 5 basic tips how to make your turbocharged car quicker. Tip number 1 is ECU tuning. That's kind of like the brain system behind the entire operation. So the fastest way to make power is to reprogram the ECU. Now, a couple of things I've learned in tuning so many cars is the ECUs, as they're programmed by the factory, are very conservative, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number 1 is they're designed so the cars will last for 100,000 miles or more. And secondly, they're designed so that no matter what kind of fuel you use, even if someone were to put 89 octane fuel in the car, it's not going to blow up. Also, the ECUs are designed so that you can be really abusive on the car and it's going to have no problem. It's going to hold together. So there's a huge margin of safety in a stock ECU. It has to operate in any kind of operating condition. When it comes to performance tuning, we can really modify those tunes and get a lot of power on the plate. Usually about 20% more power just remapping a stock ECU on a completely stock car. So that's really the simplest and easiest way to make power on a turbocharged car, is just remapping the ECU, increasing the boost, modifying the air-fuel ratio, usually leaning it out a little bit, giving it a little bit more timing, and depending upon the type of fuel you're using, you can make a little bit more power. There's a couple of different ways to go about stock ECU tuning. Where I have a cob access port right here. This is one of my favorites. The reason why I like this one so much is because after you use this device, you can actually take the map out of the car, put it back in the access port, and sell it. Another thing I like about the access port, you can actually upload other maps as you go through the upgrade sequence. This is a great device so you can, as soon as you change an exhaust or an intake or something, then you can change the tune that's in the car and you can pick up more power easily and the car is going to run properly. Great device. By the way, there's a lot of different people who are watching this video who run different types of platforms. If you have any platform specific questions, this is kind of like a general video. We're covering, basically like any kind of car. If you're a Subaru guy, or if you're an Evo guy, or if you're a Porsche guy, if you have any platform specific questions, leave a comment, right? I'll answer your question. I'll give you a detailed answer. Go ahead, fire away. Maybe some other members of the community can chime in and give you some information as well. So if you have any specific question about your platform, if you're considering a specific modification, put a comment down below and we'll try to answer as quickly as possible. Okay, tip number 2, exhaust system. Okay, on a turbocharged car, the best exhaust is no exhaust. Okay, so the best exhaust you can have on a turbocharged car, believe it or not, is like a short, fat 6-inch tube that's about that long. That's the best exhaust you can have. It's always a compromise between sound level and performance. Okay, so when you're driving on the street, obviously you don't want the attention of all the police in your neighborhood. You don't want to get a ticket every day. So you want to balance sound and performance, right? So depending upon the power level you're running, you want to pick the appropriate exhaust system that has a manageable sound level, right? But the factory systems, for the most part, are very restrictive because they need to basically, not irritate the OEM buyer, right? And irritate his family, like, oh my God, the car is so loud, it has a drone inside, it's so annoying. So they're very quiet. They have very small sized tubes because smaller tube cuts out all that bass sound. Also, another consideration is the stock exhaust system has very restrictive cats, right? So a high flow cat is what I recommend. A lot of tuners say take cats out completely and run catless. You're going to get into a situation where your car is going to stink not only are you going to pollute the atmosphere, which is totally unnecessary, but you're also going to stink up your own car when you're stopped at a red light and the wind is blowing. It's going to blow the fumes back into your own car. So I like to run a really high quality, high flow cat. They're not cheap. They add a lot of money to the cost of the build, but you get the extra benefit of A, if the police pull you over, you're not going to get a ticket for having no cat. B, the second thing is you're going to have a cleaner smelling exhaust, and third, you're going to be able to pass emissions. All right, if you have a smog test or emissions, you have a cat on the car, you're going to pass emissions with no problem. So when it comes to exhaust, I recommend that you go out and you listen to exhausts. You know, go to car meets on the forums, find people in your area that have similar types of cars in yours. Listen to some of the exhausts. It's really, there's no really right answer or wrong answer when it comes to exhaust systems. Like I said, the best exhaust is no exhaust. So there's every exhaust system has a trade-off. So you know what? Listen to some exhausts. Pick the one that works for you. And when you find the one that works for you, you'll be all set. So exhaust system, the way it makes more power is the turbocharged system is like a giant air pump. Okay, so the more air you pump in, the more air you pump out, the more power you make. So an exhaust system is like a cork. It's creating back pressure. Okay, so the back pressure eliminates the ability of the cylinder to evacuate, and it also reduces the ability of the turbo to spin because it creates back pressure after the turbo. So it's just a restriction in the system and you're losing power. So the less exhaust system you have, the least restrictive, the better. More power, easy way to make power. Put an exhaust system on a car. Tip number 3, panel air filter. Okay, I'm not a big fan of the so-called cold air intakes or air intake kits. A lot of those intakes, particularly on Porsche or Subaru, the way they're designed to actually draw hot air from the engine compartment into the air intake, they'll actually cost you horsepower. We've tested that on dyno many times. You can go back and review some of my videos. I have hundreds of videos where we tested intakes. A panel drop-in air filter can get you between 7 to 15 horsepower depending on what kind of car over the stock drop-in air filter. In the stock airbox, and particularly in a Porsche vehicle, it keeps the stock cold air coming in from the deck lid, and you get that cold air coming into your engine, but you have the less restrictive flow. I'm going to put a link in the description in the comments on what kind of panel filter I recommend. It's cheap, it's easy, it's a way to pick up 7 to 15 horsepower extra on your car. It's a great tip. You don't have to do any extra tuning. It's just free horsepower. Can't beat it. I really recommend panel drop-in air filters. Tip number 4, intercoolers. Okay, a turbocharger is kind of like a hair dryer. Okay, when you compress air, when you're boosting air, the air, all the molecules are banging into each other, right, as they're being compressed, and that creates heat. Okay. It's just physics, okay? We don't need to get into physics here. Let's just keep it really simple, this video, right? But suffice it to say, when you're boosting air, it creates heat. So what happens is, as that boosted air is leaving the turbocharger, no matter what kind of turbocharger you have, the air is getting really hot. Now, so the factory intercooler is woefully inadequate to deal with that kind of heat. All right, so basically it drops it down a little bit, but not much. Okay, so on a factory intercooler, it's basically, a cost-effective item. It's not a performance item. The factory intercooler leaves a lot to be desired. Okay, so it really doesn't work that well. So just to give you an example, as we're using the Porsche as the example, on a 70, 75 degree day on a normal stock Porsche turbo, your intercooler, stock intercooler, the air intake temperatures can go to 130 to 140 degrees after the intercooler. That's tremendously hot air. Okay, so if you go with a quality intercooler like the one I recommend, which is the AMS intercooler kit, which uses a Garrett core, about the biggest one that you could fit inside of a Porsche turbo, that intercooler will keep you about 10 to 20 degrees above ambient no matter what happens. Okay, so that's like a huge difference. That's like dropping you down like 30 degrees below where you are in the stock intercooler. So that's a huge difference in power, right? That's what's cooling the charge temps, making the air much more dense. Okay, so when you have denser air, that means you have more oxygen in the cylinder. That means you can put more gasoline into your mix. Okay, so gasoline is what actually makes power in a turbocharged car. So the cooler the charge temp, the more gasoline that you can burn, right, and the more power you're going to make. Another thing to consider with intercooler design is when you have an intercooler that's a high performance intercooler, it has less of a pressure drop. Now, back in some of my older videos, we put boost pressure gauges before and after the intercooler to measure the pressure drop across the core, to see how much pressure we'd actually drop across the core. So if the intercooler is restrictive, you'll actually choke off your flow of air and lose boost pressure across the intercooler. Okay, so as the intercooler efficiency increases, you won't lose boost pressure. Tip number 5, our last tip on how to make more power from your turbocharged car, and a lot of people are going to be surprised when I tell you this one, but after tuning thousands and thousands and thousands of cars, this one, you know, it's something that some people overlook. Tune up your car, okay? So you don't have to go out and buy parts or spend money, right? What you need to do is tune up your car. What I mean by that, I mean, make sure your spark plugs are fresh. I like Denso Iridium plugs. Gap them a little tighter than original OEM. Gap them a little tighter because we're trying to make a little more power. So have a nice tight gap. Make sure your oil is fresh. Boost leak test, super important, okay? It's particularly on the Subaru and on the Porsche, both. The fuel pressure regulator is something that constantly, the hose that goes on there that gives boost to the fuel pressure regulator constantly pops off, right? You know, almost 50% of the cars that I've seen out in the field to tune, that hose has popped off, and that's creating a significant boost leak, right? So the car's never going to run right. The customer is complaining, my car's not running right, my tune is off, I have no power, my friend's pulling on me. How come I do all these mods and my car's slower than my friend's stock car? Why? Because that little hose is popped off. That you have a clamp loose on a boost hose, right? So before you start investing in dyno time and tuning time and installing parts and doing all this other stuff, do yourself a favor. If you're not mechanically inclined, if you can't figure out how to do this stuff yourself, that's not a problem. Take your car to a good mechanic and have them do a boost leak test, right? Before you start modifying the car, do a compression test. Make sure you're dealing with a healthy motor. How many times have I had people come in to get a tune or get their car modified and they're dealing with a motor that's already got a bad ring land or a compression issue or bore scoring or some other kind of problem. They're trying to put parts on the car and push it and make power, and the car's already hurt and has a problem. The car's not going to run right. So the final tip was make sure your car's tuned up and in good mechanical order. That may seem self-apparent, right? But a lot of people who are modifying their cars, they skip through that part. You know, so in conclusion, I just want to say that, you know, owning a turbocharged car is something that we all have a lot of passion for. It's something that brings us a lot of enjoyment and pleasure. When we modify the car, we're putting our own stamp, our own individuality upon that car. It's kind of like personalizing it to our own, you know, the way we want it. Okay, you can modify it, right, by adding the type of exhaust you want, the type of tune you want, the type of air intake, all the parts that you want to put on that car and make it run just the way you want, how you want it, right? And then not only are you going to enjoy the hobby, right, of modifying the car, right, but every time you get in the car, you're going to have the enjoyment of knowing that you planned this out. You know, you were behind this. This was your creation. Is individualizing the car and making it part of your own personality. So I wish you all the best. Boost on, and if you have any questions or comments, put them in the bottom and I'll answer any questions anybody has about any specific applications. And thanks for watching.